άρχισε η οδύσσιά μου. Ο γουλιάδος μου, ο Ερίκος ο Σεβίλιας, ο οποίος ήταν στο Auschwitz πέθανε με τον αριθμό.
Ερίκος Σεβίλιας από την Αθήνα.
The Allied entry into Rome was made as the wheels of the invasion machine were already turning. We must not let our thoughts drift away from the great victories of our armies in Italy. Or let their wonderful achievements go unsung. The two offensives
Partisans arose everywhere on the Allied
the
side.
timing of their blows
They
so
demand to
obviously
take over
synchronized.
control in Milan. The Germans
This army men
decided to
drive through
retreat.
the city, past the Colosseum, place of ancient Roman holidays of quite a different nature.
Mussolini went there to negotiate with the partisans. Then, on sudden impulse, he decided to leave
Through
with
the
the
streets of
Germans.
Rome drives General Mark
Left
Clark.
in a German
The
truck,
capital is intact and wears no
disguised in a
scars of
German
battle.
greatcoat.
The illustrious city has been wrested undamaged from the enemy. The population gives itself up to excitement as the shackles of German domination fall
As
away.
the German convoy
The
passed through
freeing
the
of Rome
mountains,
has crowned a long
Mussolini was
succession of
joined by
victories
his
in Africa
mistress,
and Europe by
Sarah
General
Picasso.
Sir Harold Alexander.
At a mountain
But
village,
Rome is not without
the
its
convoy
incidents.
was stopped
Revolt
by
against tyranny is
partisans.
expressed in several ways.
They agreed
In
to
the
let the
Piazza
Germans
Venezia,
go through.
anti-fascists
They
hurl
would
a
hand
bomb into
over
a large
any
insurance
Italians.
building in which several
Mussolini,
fascists are in hiding.
Sarah Picasso,
The temper
were
of the crowd
discovered.
boils over, and there's a rush to lay hands on
Partisans,
them.
not quite knowing what
Italian
to do with them,
carabinieri working under
stuck them
Allied
in a
instructions
remote
are sent in to
farmhouse.
stop bloodshed.
The next
But
day,
nearby, Italian
communist
patriots are smashing
partisans
down the door
learned
of
who the
another building.
prisoners were.
They want to get at a bunch
They
of
went up to
quislings
the
who have been
farmhouse,
working with the Germans
told
at this radio
Mussolini to come
studio,
with them.
converted into a Nazi
Mussolini said,
headquarters.
"You've come
This
to
time
rescue
they're
me.
lucky. They chuck the
I'll give you
quislings
an
out into the
empire."
street, socking them good
The
and plenty.
partisans, Benito Mussolini and Sarah Picasso, 2 yards along the road. There he shot them both. 28th of April, 1945. The dead bodies were taken in a truck down to Milan. Here they were put on public display. Once more the crowd
Here's another
turned
side of
out to
Italian
see
demonstration.
Mussolini.
Huge crowds make their way
This
to
time
St.
to
Peter's
demonstrate
to hear
their
the Pope
hate
giving thanks for the
and to
sparing of
heap
the
on
city
him
from destruction.
all the blame
His speech from the
for the
balcony is
disasters
recorded
which
by
had
an
overwhelmed
Italy.
Italy.
Inabili distruzioni. Guarda oggi con nuova speranza e con rinnovata fiducia alla sua salvezza.
More applause from the Romans as Italian soldiers parade the flag through the streets. They like to share in the victory.
Alone and in silence, Pope Francis wanted to visit Auschwitz, not to talk, but to listen. He crossed the mythical entrance where prisoners could read this perverse message: work liberates. And while there he sat on a simple bench, he dedicated 15 minutes to a silent prayer. As he did before the monument commemorating the genocide of the Armenians, the Pope wanted to visit the Nazi concentration camp to hold the same tone. A silent memory of tragedy showing the worst side of human beings. He greeted one by one 10 Holocaust survivors in the square where prisoners were shot and killed, against the wall of death. Today it stands reconstructed. At his feet, the Pope placed a candle and then placed his hand on the memorial wall. Pope Francis was able to fulfill his wish to pray in the tiny dark cell where St. Maximilian Kolbe died. The Franciscan friar offered to die instead of letting another prisoner who had a family to care for. Afterwards, he left this written note.
We never saw injuries like that.
Secretly closed the actual doings of that night.
Why was the bombing of Bari Harbour such a disaster? Why did people with negligible injuries mysteriously begin to die? Why did Eisenhower and Churchill decide to cover up the story, making the Bari disaster one of the most secret events of the Second World War? The Pearl Harbor of the Mediterranean began when 105 Luftwaffe Junkers planes were launched against Bari Harbor, at that time under British control. It was the evening of the 2nd of December, 1943. The German air raid took the Allied defence completely by surprise.
The harbour was lit up.
The moment I thought they were shooting stars come very close. That's what it felt like. And three came, one after the other.
The most important harbour supplying the 8th Army during the Italian campaign was impaired for 3 weeks. It was a huge blow for the Allied forces.
It just looked as if everything that had happened there had been swept under the carpet.
1,000 people lost their lives. But that wasn't the end of the story. The tragedy was only beginning.
There was this cloud of secrecy.
Secrecy clothed the actual doings of that night.
We were sworn to secrecy.
Eisenhower and Churchill initiated a cover-up. The attack on Bari Harbor was one of the most secret events of the war in Italy. The Bari disaster could also have had even greater consequences for the civilians. Doctors began to treat the wounded. But something strange happened.
The medical staff were very perplexed by their symptoms.
We'd never seen anything like this.
Era lì nudo, sotto al lenzuolo, nudo, non c'era nessun grafico.
Things were not normal.
La pelle nera, tutta marron diventata.
And these were rather large blisters, you know.
Victims began dying.
Come mai queste persone stanno morendo?
What was going on?
They themselves didn't really know what to do.
Yet rumours were going around.
Were they just rumours? What do these pictures mean? Were the Germans using new and terrible weapons? A few days later, the name of an American ship began to circulate. It was underlined in official documents. The John Harvey. Why? What was the ship carrying? Why was it in Italy? What is the secret of this ship? Using original documents, we'll retrace the most successful German air raid in the Mediterranean. We'll follow the Allied convoy with its ultra documents and the reconnaissance messages. We will relive the story of men that risked their lives during the rescue operations, and the story of a man that has waited 25 years to unveil the tragedy, collecting memories that seemed lost. We'll relive the drama of the Bari civilians and of the Italian seamen of the Barletta. We'll discover the results of the secret board of inquiry established by Eisenhower, the Bari Report. We'll dip into the nightmare of weapons that most frightened the civilians during the war. Chemical weapons, biological weapons, discussing how and when they could have been used, and when and if they were used. Discover how a new treatment against cancer rose from the ashes of this disaster. And in the end, we will also discover the secret link between Bari and D-Day in Normandy.
Many of the Jewish refugees saw Europe as the graveyard of the Jewish people. Wherever they went, they were reminded of the life that had been there before. Some remained in the concentration camps, others fled. Some tried to get to mandatory Palestine, but the doors were closed by British restrictions. The United States as well had difficult immigration policies. Thousands in the end managed to get to South Africa, Australia, and South America. However, because of the excessive red tape, the increasing anti-Semitism, the difficult voyages, there was no other option for many of these people but to congregate in camps that were set up by the Allies after the war. These camps were called displaced persons camps. Conditions in the DP camps, especially at the beginning, were very difficult. Some of the camps were located in former concentration camps. Some of them were even located in former German army barracks, so that many of the survivors were walking around behind barbed wire, still in their concentration camp uniforms. Food and medicine were very scarce. The death rate remained high for weeks. And still, these refugees streamed into the DP camps. For many, it would be the place where they would take their first steps forward. In teaching about these first steps, we need to ask, what are the things we take for granted that represented freedom to the survivors of the Holocaust? A book, a pen, a piece of fruit, a hot shower with soap. These were all basic things that had been taken away from those who had survived, so basic that it's hard for us today to grasp this.
It was important and urgent to give them back their identity. Therefore, we learned their names, and when we managed to say, "Good morning, Menashe, how are you, Mordechai?" they were so surprised. They looked at us and could not believe that someone was calling them by name.
It was not only the physical, material things that needed to be restored. The survivors' faith in humanity, especially that of the children, also had to be restored. Children who had been abused, who had been hidden, who had seen death, had become very, very cynical of the adult world. Their confidence needed to be rebuilt. For instance, we can ask students to look at the poster that they see here and to try and find a deeper meaning beyond the simple act that they see. What is the adult doing besides trying to help the child put on her shoe? What does the child's body language say? Does she feel free to lean on the adult? Once children's faith in humanity was restored, once anyone's faith in humanity was restored, then these people could go ahead and start to try to rehabilitate their lives.
Their thirst for knowledge is amazing. One fact is worthy of mention. Not a single pupil is late for class. They come without breakfast because the canteen is open at 8:30 while school begins at 8. Anyone who is aware of the sensitivity to hunger of the former Kotsetniks will appreciate their devotion to studies.
For many survivors, culture and education were very important. We can ask, why were they so important when for many of these people food was still scarce, they were still in mourning, and the future was still very uncertain? For many of them, culture was what represented the bridge between their former lives. It connected them to their previous traditions. It was also a way to escape their reality. Education was the key to their futures. For instance, survivors in the DP camps published more than 70 newspapers. They had film screenings, they established sports clubs, there were theaters, there was art, there was culture. They also established schools to give the children whose lives had been interrupted vocational and educational training. In addition, they began commemoration projects. The camps were full of posters everywhere to make people aware of all these activities. The atmosphere was the opposite of the desperation and the awful uncertainty that the survivors of the Holocaust had been living with. As a matter of fact, the atmosphere was one of a frenzy of activity, as though these people were trying to make up for all the time they had lost. Survivors who were alone tried to make new human connections. They reached out for other survivors who instinctively understood the trauma and the loss they had experienced without having to discuss it too much.
People got married. They would take a hut and divide it into 10 tiny rooms for 10 couples. The desire for life overcame everything. After such destruction, to build a new life, to get married, to bring children into the world, in the ability to forget lay the ability to create a new life.
There was an astonishing number of marriages in the DP camps, sometimes as many as 6 every day. And after the marriages came children. In fact, the survivors' birth rate was higher than anywhere else in the world. In the Bergen-Belsen camp alone, 555 babies were born in 1946. And by 1948, the camp was celebrating the birth of the 1,000th baby. All of these things were manifestations of the survivors' drive to live, and not only to live, but also to create new life. They were building a future. After spending needed time in the DP camps, where the survivors could recuperate, reestablish their connections, and regain their footing, they moved on to places where they could put down roots and settle permanently. Survivors immigrated to all parts of the world, with the majority of them reaching and settling in the United States and in Israel. Wherever they went, they contributed to the societies in which they settled. For Jewish survivors, the end of the war was merely the beginning of a difficult journey. They needed to adapt to living with the scars of loss and the memories that they would continue to carry with them. Though some survivors never recovered from the trauma of the Holocaust, most of them managed to build a new life.